So it's mid-November, we still haven't gotten a title or cover reveal for the supposed ninth Tales from the Pizzaplex book, and considering all the evidence to the contrary, I think it's safe to say that B72 was the final entry in this series, and the time is ripe for a retrospective. And thank God for that. Also, before we begin, wait till the end of this video for a big announcement. First, my thoughts on this series' epilogues, which I am calling the Mimic Massacre. Compared to the Stitch Wraith saga, the Fazbear Frights epilogues, the Mimic Massacre is a much better story. It's more focused, there's a sense of character, there's a good creepy atmosphere, and the horror, ranging from brooding tension to outright brutality, is very well done. Seriously, I think the Mimic Massacre is the most violent and crazy these Faz books have gotten. It reminded me of a pulpy teen slasher from the 80s, and I am all here for it. The Mimic itself is also allowed to shine in these entries. In Ruin, it was little more than a cameo, so if you really want to learn more about this thing and see what it can do, then by all means, check out the Mimic Massacre. If you're willing to buy 8 whole-ass books, of course. I do not condone pirating books. However, I still have 2 major problems with these epilogues. 1, the pacing. This series is just way too overstretched. Each entry is dedicated to the Mimic picking off this cast of characters one by one per entry, and once I started to catch on to that, it was kind of a big letdown. The first entry with the construction crew is by far the best, but unfortunately the epilogues don't get any more interesting or dynamic than that. I thought that across 8 books they'd present a story with more meat to chew on, but no, it's just a slow downhill romp straight out of the gate. Which leads me to problem 2, just a general lack of profundity. Remember that throughout the tales there is this ongoing saga with the Mimic, the AR booth, the storyteller tree, Edwin Murray, Tiger Rock. I was hoping that the epilogues would try and shed some light on that whole mess. But no. As a whole, the Mimic Massacre is a simple story of survival featuring these completely isolated characters that have no impact on the main books. Give the Stitch Wraith saga some credit, for as batshit stupid as that was, it still attempted to tie in Eleanor with the rest of the Frights, brought the time-traveling ball pit full circle, and fleshed out the concept of remnant. Meanwhile, the Mimic Massacre just kinda happens chronologically before the tales. It doesn't really say much about Ruin. It just kind of exists, which isn't a problem with the writing, it just made the presentation a chore. But, on a technical level, the Mimic Massacre is good, and it's a monumental improvement over the Stitch Wraith saga. It was a welcome respite from the mind-numbing insanity of the Tales from the Pizzaplex. So, what about the main books? Well, first I'll say what I said about the Fazbear Frights. It is difficult to write short stories, especially 24 in a complete series like this. It's difficult to collaboratively write, especially with a nut job like Scott Cawthon and a money-grubbing company like Scholastic and AFK Books who have an incentive to just churn out as many of these things as possible. So we must commend the sheer output and effort that these entities produced. I know I'd be proud if my work spawned an 8-book series of short stories. Good things about the tales. Yeah, there were stories that I legitimately liked. Haps, Bobby Dots Part 1, GGY, Nexi, Didophobia, and B7, which just still remains a complete literary anomaly. It's definitely the best piece of FNaF official fiction I've read so far. Once again, the tales did not hold back with the gore and the weird violence and deaths. Like, even bad stories like Bleeding Heart and B7-2 had their wonderfully wicked moments. Things like that keep me invested. But now, we gotta get to the bad shit. Honestly though, I think the tales are slightly better than the Frights. Maybe because the themes tying these stories to the Pizzaplex specifically kept them more grounded, maybe because there were less of them, there was less of an opportunity for things to spiral out of control. I don't know. They were definitely less exhausting to read, however. Again, just like the Frights, these stories took themselves way too seriously, they were a tonal mess, and there's a disappointing lack of technical and narrative variety. We did get some two-parters in this series, but with each instance, the conclusion was a letdown. However, if Blackbird syndrome was the Fazbear Fright's defining illness, for this series, it's plankton palsy, where a story features some absurdly advanced technology that's absurdly advanced just so things can play out as the author intends. The Monty Within and Bleeding Heart are the two most egregious examples of this. And this is where the Pizzaplex setting serves as kind of a double-edged sword, for despite keeping story ideas grounded with this central theme, when the limitations show, boy, do they show. The only reason you would ever write a story about flying nanobots that wrap Christmas presents, dig into your skin, and carve tattoos upon command is because you reached your limits as to what could happen inside the Pizzaplex. And that's not to say there isn't a lot you can write about regarding the Pizzaplex, but I did start to notice that very few elements already in Security Breach actually made their way into the books. Why would you downplay the things we recognize from Security Breach so much? Moondrop shows up as a dream sphere. Monty shows up in a video game that reads your brainwaves, and the rest are just relegated to, they're not even cameos, they're just brief mentionings. Like, what the hell? What was the thought process behind that? Why would you write a story about a ghost girl in the AR booth, or a cult of FNaF tabletop gamers who eat dirt, or retread a concept first introduced all the way back in To Be Beautiful when Freddy, Monty, Roxy, and the DJ Music Man are just sitting there in the corner waiting for their turn? If you're going to introduce things that weren't in the main games at the expense of the things that were, then at least make them interesting or believable. And all of this is in light of the supposed fact that these books specifically are canonical to the main games. And I'm gonna be real with you folks, it may be true, but it just doesn't work. There's too much retconning, too much crap that doesn't make sense, and aside from the Mimic, Ruin doesn't do a good job of reinforcing it. Fazbear Frights went off the rails with its lack of limits. Tales from the Pizzaplex had limits, but they completely dicked around with what they had and produced something needlessly divergent. This reworked canon featuring the Mimic and the Storyteller Tree and Edwin Murray that just goes nowhere and leaves a lot to be desired. It's so infuriating how we just keep changing and recontextualizing shit. This overarching FNaF narrative is not allowed to grow. It just keeps getting hacked up and altered and sent back to the starting line. And I truly think that's a direct result of how Security Breach was just fundamentally broken on a narrative level. We had Vanny, we had Glitch Trap, and they just fucked it. And now we gotta save face with this whole ass book series and a DLC that's basically saying, oh, you thought that was the story? Wait till you see this. Anyway, Tales from the Pizzaplex has the same strengths and weaknesses I've come to expect. The epilogues were an improvement, but I just despise how they can just treat this overarching narrative like it's a lump of clay you can smash and rework if it doesn't satisfy you. Like, you can't do that, folks. Not only is it disrespectful, but dare I say it, it's unprofessional. I can't think of another series of comparable popularity that treats stories like this. It's baffling. But now we're at the end of this video. So what's the big announcement? Well, I had a big announcement at the end of my Fazbear Frights retrospective, so you can probably guess where this is going. Yes, I am writing another piece of Faz fiction, my own Tale from the Pizzaplex. And you can probably also guess who it's going to feature. A character who got absolutely shafted by these books. A character who more than deserves their time in the moonlight. And if that doesn't narrow it down, then I don't know what will. This piece is going to be longer than my previous work, and it's going to come out sometime later down the road. My review of The Troop will be uploaded before then, and you should still also watch that video, especially following this retrospective. But rest assured, the Faz fiction is coming, and I am beyond excited to share with you all. So, until next time, take care.